Good morning, everybody. Very, very happy to be with you today. I'd like to first do an introduction with the two superbly capable members of our panel this morning. First, we have Kyung Yoon, who really arguably might be the most connected person in senior talent in Silicon Valley and in Asia. I knew Kyung from Heidrick and Struggle days. She was promoted so fast, that nobody ever gave her a business card because they just kept on pushing her up. But this is how it's been all over the world. Unbelievable. Very grateful to have Kyung here. Also, we have Evan here, who epitomizes top talent, really. So background, led leadership at Wharton, went on to do the same at Google, then HP, now leading as a senior vice president the people work at Box.net. So literally, I think we couldn't have two better people to have this conversation today. But let me just tee up what I think is the situation we find ourselves in. So for many innovative companies, they're faced with a challenge, and the challenge is that their world is fast and full of opportunity. And the complication with that is that when you have such high growth over such a short period of time, it's easy to end up hiring good people, or even not so good people, but just not great people, because the urgency to get somebody in and to grow is so extreme. And so the implication of that, not to put too fine a point on it, as Guy Kawasaki put back in 1991 at Apple, he said the risk is that you can experience a bozo explosion. So that you're actually not getting the best people, and they're not getting the best people, and so on. In the name of growth, you're not actually developing your innovation capability in the way you might want to. And so suddenly you've got a challenge. Now, my position as we go into this conversation is that anything short of being incredibly selective on your talent, and also incredibly courageous in pruning the talent that isn't actually the very best you can have, the most innovative. Anything short of that will produce a problem that will make innovation harder, become a bottleneck. And so what I'm asking you to do over the next sort of hour or so is to ask questions, not just across the whole range of talent development, because it's such a vast subject, but specifically about maybe two questions. And I've given every person has a 3x5 card. I want you to write down a question on two subjects so that we can have a very robust conversation here. The first question is any question you have about how do you get the right talent? How do you find the most innovative talent? So any questions you have around that, around hiring. And then the second question is any questions you have about the other side of that tough coin, which is how do you get rid of talent that isn't actually exactly what you want? So I'm going to give you a moment to think about it, a question around the hiring and also the question, heaven forbid I say firing, but at least somehow managing out talent that isn't performing. Those are the two questions. So just give you 30 seconds or so to write down those because I want a lot of the conversation to come from the group. I'll just give you a moment. Okay, so I think we have enough to go on. I'll ask a couple of questions, and then I'm going to do something. It's not so much I'm just going to have each person ask a question directly to the panel. We'll have 2 or 3 people ask questions, and then we'll decide which ones we want to actually, all answer, and we'll go from there. Okay, so first of all, let's just set the context again. I'll start with Evan, have you seen in your experience what we were talking about a moment ago with this bozo explosion? Have you seen a situation where growth is so large or for any other reasons you're hiring out of urgency, but not necessarily the very best talent? Have you seen this?
I would say I'm fortunate that I haven't seen it as much as you would expect. So both Google and my current company, Box, know about the regression to the mean, know about A's hiring B's, hiring C's, and are almost maniacally focused on that not happening. What I've seen more in the startup environment is people growing, their roles grow faster than their capabilities, which is different. They're not bozos, they're not, but they sometimes can't keep pace with the role requirements of their jobs, and that's the tricky situation. Rather than we're so focused at Box certainly about not bringing in anybody who's not the most amazing person in the world, but what do you do with the people that have been there for 4 years who are now in big roles with huge responsibilities and may not have had the time to develop up to that level? I think
you're describing, so they were top talent, they weren't hired incorrectly, but all of a sudden their role makes them arguably no longer correct for.
Or it doesn't utilize their skill set, right? They were great at coming up with ideas, but now they have to manage teams and put in processes, and this is just not their skill set and not something they learned along the way.
Talk to us about this first idea of Google and Box being able to sort of take on this challenge. How do they do that? Either company, let's start with Box. How does Box make sure that they really are getting, as you say, sort of best person on the planet? How do they do that?
Yeah, so we only have 2 numbers in our hiring process that we look at, and they're equally weighted. Technical ability, which depending on the role could be anything from actually engineering skills for our brand and marketing people. It could be creativity and innovation type of things. For our leader type roles, it could be leadership capabilities or management capabilities. And the other one is cultural fit. Those are the only 2 things that we score, and we hold those equally. So
50-50.
Just about. Yeah, it depends on the role, right? So for leaders, we might hold the cultural fit more important because the modeling behavior and the impact the leader can have on the culture is greater.
And how do you assess that? How do you make sure, let's start on the cultural side, how do you make sure that this person really is a superb fit for that? Beyond saying it matters.
Yep. Well, so the first is knowing who you are, right? So you can't, the culture for innovation is equally as important, at least, as the individual. Right? So you can have innovative individuals go into a culture where they're stifled, and you can have people who didn't think of themselves as creative or innovative or never showed that capability before enter an environment that really lets them grow and blossom and be great. So first, know who you are. So we have a very strong culture, and we talk about it all the time, and we constantly refine how we talk about it, how we think about it. So we know who we are and what we're looking for. One of those values that you talked about, for example, is take risks, fail fast, and GSD, which is get stuff done. That is one of our driving cultural features, and we need to know that that's important, and we need to know we're looking for people who know how to do that. And then we have a lot of probably false negatives in our hiring process. A lot of people we don't hire who might have been effective. We're willing to not take a chance on the margin, and we just stick to people we know can be really effective. And we're doing a lot of research to make sure that continues to be true.
Okay, one more follow-up question, and then we'll come to you, Kyung. So when you say we want to err on that side of it, how do you help? So, a manager, you've had a manager, they're hiring somebody, they've been in the company 3 months. How do you make sure that they really are empowered and understand that would be the value choice?
Yeah, I just had this conversation this morning. So it comes up all the time.
What was the context? Tell us the context for that.
A new hiring manager, senior sales leader at Box wanted to hire somebody, and our CEO and other co-founder, who's our CFO, approve every hire. Still, we hire about 100 people a quarter, so the volume at this point is still reasonable for that. And the CEO kind of wasn't approving this hire, and there was a question as to why. And so we socialize with all new leaders kind of what our hiring rubric is and the problem of regression to the mean and the concern about A's hiring B's hiring C's. We have that conversation kind of monthly with all our new leaders, and then I make sure to have that conversation when it actually pops up and say, hey, here's the issue. In this case, somebody pretty much fresh out of school, don't have a lot of data about how they actually are in the work world. And so the only data you have is the quality of their education and how well they did within that environment. And it just wasn't up to our standards. For later in career, we don't care as much about that. You've proven yourself at companies and work environments, but early, and the leader was like, really, we care about that so much? Yes.
Right. So insufficient data in this case. about...
Well, not insufficient data. The data we had was only based on education and wasn't good enough.
That's a different thing. That's insufficient experience, isn't it?
Yeah.
Not insufficient data. Thank you so much. Kyung, same question to you. Have you seen this problem in the companies you work with? This, I mean, bozo explosion is a provocative way of saying it, but the idea of hiring for out of urgency rather than out of this is the right person in this role. Have you had that experience?
Yeah, I've experienced this in spades because I've been working on a lot of cross-border Asia expansion, especially China and India and other countries, Taiwan, Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore, and especially during the when there was a big IPO boom for Chinese companies recently. I think this is kind of related, but the CFOs for those companies were, they needed to speak Mandarin, they needed to have GAAP, they needed to understand all of the accounting standards, they needed to have managerial experience, and they needed to have IPO experience. Well, it was very difficult to find these people because the, not just the industries were growing, but the whole economy was exploding, the whole region was exploding, in fact. And there was a real scarcity of qualified talent. And it wasn't just, this is a very specific, easy to understand example, but many, many companies were promoting junior accounting people to be the CFO to go public. They had no idea what they were doing as a publicly held company. They had no idea of the compliance issues and all of the infrastructure building and the need to deal with Wall Street and to communicate with the outside world, the inside world, put all the internal controls in. And the aftermath of that is that IPOs became toxic out of that environment, especially China, and the window closed. I mean, there was just, so this is a very good example of the market imperative pushing, and then, the boards would say, well, we just need somebody that can do
Basically
this job.
do it.
And then, but then the people that had the qualifications were all mainly Caucasians who spoke English. They couldn't speak Mandarin in a day. There's no way to bridge that gap. So the boards would say, okay, we'll go for the Mandarin because we still need that. And then we will figure out a way to take more junior people and try to expand their capabilities. But the gap was too great. And so in a majority of these cases, there was a lot of problems. And governance, okay. And so that's one example. Right now, in corporate America, I think Fortune 500 companies have a huge problem on their boards because the economic model of business is changing so fast. And we've had cybersecurity issues. They don't know, many of the board members don't understand what the digital, what's happening on the digital world. They don't understand what's happening with social networks. So it's not just growth, it's transformation. Very rapid transformation. So the big drivers of change are technology. 10 years ago, we didn't have iPads. Now, you can't imagine the retail world today without an iPad. So think about the revolution that has happened in the supply chain, the retailers, any industry company that has to start from that as the customer interface. People are not going into stores, they're just sitting there in their living rooms buying stuff off their iPad, and then they expect instantaneous delivery. Well, how do you manage a supply chain in that instance? The whole world is changing. So I think it's technology change, it's all the convergence of big data, big ubiquitous consumer power everywhere, social networks, everybody knowing where you are, and all of this, along with globalization. The world has this, as Thomas Friedman says, we are now multi-connected every which way. So it's not just flat, but it's super connected. And if you look at the Fortune 500 boards and the tenure of the board members, I think that's another place where you've got, the pace of change and the pace and the imperatives of the market outpacing the capabilities of the people that are sitting there in those positions. So I think it's really kind of, I see it everywhere because it's not business as usual.
Yeah, I was, you mentioned Thomas Friedman, and I was talking to Thomas in in China just, I think, last summer, and he made this observation that we've really shifted, even in the last 10 years, from being, and everybody knows this, but it's almost still helpful to name it, which is we've gone from being connected to hyper-connected. Just in that 10 years. So it's sort of, the old news is still news, which is the internet still is transforming everything. Mobile's still transforming everything. And so it's creating, I think, as you rightly say, not just in high growth circumstances, but in almost any industry, a perfect storm of speed and intensity and transformation and change. So one follow-up question for you, and then I'm going to come to questions from the group. What should somebody do in this situation? Choose either of them. So choose China in the IPO challenge. What should they have done? You've got the market imperative. You've got to move now. This is urgency. What should they have done in that situation from your point of view?
Well, I think the people that were able to really go and get the talent that had the capabilities, or combine people's talents so that you could bring in a very senior person, either at the board level or at the VP of at the CFO level, and then put in a VP of finance or a controller that could speak the language and then kind of bridge for the capability, instead of just saying, oh no, we need a CFO here, this is what we got and we're going to go with this. I mean, that's very short-sighted, right? So I think that taking a more strategic approach and a more creative approach and a longer-term approach, if you have two people, okay, it costs you more. But if your company is going to get delisted in 2 years, that's a huge price to pay, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
You need to think beyond the immediacy of what you're trying to do, and think about the consequences.
How does, I love this idea, obviously of strategic, management of your talent and thinking about talent as part of your overarching strategy, on the idea that, the one decision you make about talent is really, I don't know if it's 1,000 decisions, is it 1,000,000 decisions made in one? If you get the wrong person, you've made 1,000,000 bad choices. You get the right talent, you've made 1,000,000 correct choices. But how does somebody do this? Is there practical, insight that you can offer as to how does somebody in a boardroom really push for this when all the pressure is pushing them to do something else? How do they do it? Is it just courage? Is it speaking up? Is it taking a pause? And then Evan, the same question.
Yeah.
How do they do this?
I think on the board members have a responsibility to really focus on succession planning and look at it as a very important part of the CEO's performance metric, and make sure that it is a very real and robust process and not just something that you pay lip service to.
Not lip service, right.
And a lot of times the management is going to, they're under a lot of pressure, and they're going to maybe do something that's quite expedient maybe. Or I've had CEOs that I've worked with that are a little insecure, and they don't want, like some super duper CFO, marching in there and saying, what about this in China? What about that? That doesn't pass muster and all that. So sometimes they're just trying to balance their team and their short-term imperatives. So I think the board has a very important role to play. And the chairman of the board, the chairwoman of the board, should have a kind of a, ongoing dialogue and make sure that the organization, the whole board, one of the most important things that a board does is hire and fire the CEO and make sure the executive team is up to snuff, right?
It is the role.
That is the role. That is one of the roles. And a lot of times boards, because they want to be polite to their CEO, they don't want to talk about what if you get hit by a truck, they don't like that. They just kind of dance around that a little bit and tiptoe, and don't really push for the best and make sure that it's, all the functions are very robust.
Yep.
But that's the only way, because it's brutal out there, and unless you have really the first-rate team and capabilities, you're not going to get that level of execution.
No, and as you say that, you can just think about the high-profile Yahoo, 5 CEOs, 1 year. HP's had some interesting challenges too. You can see these are very real issues here in Silicon Valley. These are not hypothetical. They're not just to talk about it. These are clearly crucial to the actual success of these companies.
Yeah, and in the boardrooms, everybody is really smart, and they come together, and then that body of people becomes this polite kind of, less than effective.
Yeah.
It's just deplorable. If
Yeah,
you
they,
look at,
they don't have the debate.
That's right. And the third role of the
Please.
board, you said, hiring, firing CEOs, making sure the senior team's working. The third is to speak truth to power, right?
Absolutely.
To ask about the elephant in the room, the questions
Totally.
that the organization either might not see to ask or might not feel empowered to ask.
Yeah.
And they don't do that nearly enough in
no,
my experience.
and that is everywhere. Truth is necessary everywhere for leadership. And the more you tiptoe around, the more you get dysfunction, and then you get cynicism, and then you got stuff being, and then you got all this inefficiency because you're trying to dance around the thing that you're not supposed to see. It's just, that's like a big waste of time.
I'd say two things just to follow up on that question. One is everybody is in a hurry to fill roles, right? The pain of having a role open is real and present, and especially when you're working at pace, which every industry is now, as we said, it's really real. And never have we always push back on wait until you get the right person, because the damage you do, as you said before, in hiring the wrong person is several years worth of damage. You have to manage them out eventually. They've tipped their team over in weird ways. It's really bad. Every time we've pushed to hold off until we find a better person, it has always been better. That person that we were looking for always came out of the woodwork at some point, and the pain was real, but it was always better for the organization, for the culture, for everything else to wait until you find, to not settle, if you will. You can solve the settling in other ways. You can get a consultant for 3 months to advise your junior person who's not really up to CFO level, but don't actually make the hire until you find the person who fits the criteria. And the first part of that, which too many organizations don't do, is figure out what the role is and what you're actually trying to hire for. You need to spend the time up front and get everybody together to say, what is this? What's the most important? Is it the language? Is it the culture fit? Is it the technical capability? And if you don't do that up front, you just churn a lot of hours in debate about who's right and can we take this risk? And it's not worth it.
Something that's underlined both of what you've said, and maybe this is surprising at some level, is the idea that courage is critical to this question. The courage to say no to somebody internally who wants to hire and is in pain and they need to do this, they're feeling pressure to perform. The courage on a board to say no, what is your real succession plan? We're not playing lip service, let's be serious about it. The courage to remove somebody who isn't necessarily the right person anymore for a position. This is leadership, real courage, I think, that's required. And so it's very, it pushes the whole subject of talent outside of some touchy-feely thing into, no, this is tough. This is the real hard stuff. Okay, so I'm going to go to questions from the group. Okay, so who has our first question for the panel?
Do they have to snap?
I think they might have to snap, actually. No, okay, who do we have? Here we go. We have a question here. What's the question? And I'm going to get 2 or 3, and then we'll see where we go. So we have at least 2 themes here that I think we'll go with. We may come back to this question here about once you've got great talent in the room, what do you do? You can have great talent that comes in and then is utilized at massively below its capability. That people that are overworked and underutilized. How do you make sure that great talent that you've selected carefully actually is able to perform superbly well? First, Evan.
Yeah, I think there are a number of pieces. Assuming you did the right things in the hiring process, got a culture fit, et cetera. The first thing is to make sure before they show up that everybody around them, their team members or the team they're inheriting if they're in a leadership position, understand the need for the role, what it is, and why we did it, right? I've seen too often somebody come in, the ground wasn't made fertile for whoever the new entrant is, and it blows up because the team said, oh, we didn't need this person anyway, or whatever. So make sure that the organization is ready for the person that you just brought in, and that's true at any level, but especially at a senior leadership level.
Let me pause on that for a second. What do you do on the first day somebody comes in? What's the process of Box? How do you make sure they land successfully? Literally first few hours they come in.
Sure. So besides all the meetings they've had with the interviews, with knowing most of the team before they get there because of the interview process, we try to be as inclusive as possible. First day, everybody, no matter what role or level, goes to a shared onboarding experience. So whether you're the receptionist or the new SVP of engineering, you're in the room with everybody else, about 20, 25 people, and you're going through the same experience. We don't give get out of jail free cards to executives that they don't have to deal with that stuff. That's for the the masses or anything. And I've been at companies where they do that, and I think it's a huge mistake, right? So we start with, we're all in this together. You're not special if you're a senior executive coming in. So that's important. In there, they kind of get the values, the culture, et cetera. And then we do follow-up meetings with all new hires about a month later with our COO and CFO talking about our values and how we make money as a business, and then our CEO talking about vision and who we are and what we're trying to be as a kind of disruptive player in the content collaboration space.
One-on-one conversation or group conversation?
As one to many of whoever was hired in the last month,
yeah.
But it's a lot of time. It's about 2 hours each of those sessions, and it's very interactive and personal. And then we have a kind of onboarding process where we suggest that the person and the individual team members meet regularly, that they kind of form those relationships. We guide that process. We don't command it, but we guide that process for what suggested best practice looks like. And then we do regular check-ins. How's it working for you? What are you seeing? I tell everybody who joins our company, you have a very short period of time to be an alien here. Right? So you're going to drink the Kool-Aid at some point. So in that short time, be it a month or two, keep a list of all the things that don't make any sense to you. They're going to be there. What? I don't get that. Why do we do this? In 30 to 60 days, 95% of those will make sense. You'll understand why we do that. There's still going to be 5-10% that doesn't make any sense. And I want you to ask those questions of the people around you. Why do we do this? And what we might find out in a fast-moving startup environment is the answer might be, when 2 offices ago, when there was this guy in that role, we created this. It doesn't make any sense anymore, right? And the only way we're going to stay fresh and innovate and iterate as an organization is if we get that feedback and we're not so navel-gazing that we think it's all normal. So that's part of it, is leveraging the fact that they're new, valuing the fact that they're new and they don't know everything, and using that to help iterate the system.
Kyung, speak to this same question. Does mentoring play a crucial role? I suppose we would probably say the answer is yes, we just say that. But how do we do that? How do we make sure that senior leaders, as you're bringing them in, really get great mentoring? Where have you seen it done really well?
Well, it was done at Heidrick & Struggles. I had the CEO who was my mentor, and it did amazing things for the kind of stuff that I got to do.
What did he do? What did Tom do? This is Tom Friel, 35 years at Heidrick & Struggles, built the Silicon Valley office for Heidrick & Struggles. Still, I always call him the godfather of Silicon Valley. He's sort of always out there connected. What did he do for you?
So he gave me some really tough assignments in the beginning. They had the Silver Bullet program for rookies who joined. I didn't have any background in search. I walked in there and they said, we have 6 broken searches, and as the rookie you can fix them. And I remember his was this really odd search called Zuken Redac. They were looking for a GM for Silicon Valley. And Zuken was Japanese and Redac I think was German, and it was an EDA company, like Mentor Graphics, and nobody wanted this job. And they said, this has been sitting around for a year, we don't know what to do with it, and as a rookie you get to fix it. So I started calling around and I realized, this is a mass consolidation in the industry. I called it the Pac-Man industry. And so I realized there are a lot of good people that are losing their jobs. And then in calling around, I found out that weekend there was an EDA conference in San Francisco. So I went and sat in the lobby and I talked to everybody and I solved the search. So he said, this Kyung knows how to do search. And by the way, that was not the way you're supposed to do search, apparently. But so he started putting me onto challenging projects, including a couple years into my tenure there. They needed to open an office in Singapore, and nobody wanted to go to Singapore because, people that are well-known in Silicon Valley and elsewhere, they don't want to leave their practice and go to some far-off country. So I'd worked in Singapore in the past, and I liked it, so I said, okay. But he put me there, and there was a lot of pushback from the partner saying, well, first of all, she's a girl, and second of all, she's not Singaporean, and third of all, what are you doing? And he said, you watch. And he had the prerogative as a very senior person in the organization to give that kind of mentoring opportunity and air cover. So I think it's really important if you can. And all along anyone's career, mentors can provide incredibly helpful, boost in terms of getting new challenges and new opportunities and chances to do things that maybe you as yourself can't really do for yourself. But coming back to your question, Marguerite, I think the culture of a company needs to be defined from the top for defining the roles very clearly, attracting the best, and empowering people, and not micromanaging them, and pushing people as fast as they can go up, and pushing responsibility down as far as you can into the organization. And many, many companies don't have that culture, and it's not defined as the culture. You have to define this cultural norm and have all the people from the CEO embrace this. Otherwise, you don't get that behavior. And each manager needs to be when they get their performance review and their bonuses, that has to be part of that performance metric. And if you bake it into the organization like that, you're going to get that. And if you don't, you're going to have people that are, sitting on top of people, micromanage them, doing power plays, not giving people exposure. There's that saying, under a big oak, no acorns can grow. Well, there are a lot of leaders like that. And you have to change, you have to specifically say, in our organization, that is not the way to prosperity and growth.
And the corollary to everybody tries to hire people quicker and take shortcuts because they know what pain they're in is nobody wants their own best people to leave to other parts of the organization because they know what they have to get done, they know what they're held accountable for. Right. And so we spend a lot of time telling our managers the sign of your success is whether you're a net exporter of great talent within the company. Right? If people leave your team and go on to do great things, even better things than they did, you're going to be seen as a developer of an exporter of talent, and that's a good thing. Plus, if you hold on to them, they're going to leave the company entirely. So wouldn't you rather have them in another role within, in this case, Box, versus at another company or a competitor?
Yeah, there's a theme here I think that's important to connect to, which is that anything less than a very proactive dismantling of hierarchy will produce a shutting down of capability. So if you're not deliberately, consciously putting into the performance metrics, constantly reinforcing the message, you will shut down capability. I mean, hierarchies, which is has a monopoly on almost all organizational types in business everywhere, will shut down capability. In fact, I was talking with a CEO recently here in Silicon Valley, and he said those classic words. He said, well, here, he said, we don't really have that problem. He said, because here, he said, we have an open door policy. Open door policy. Anyone in the business can come and talk to me any day, get mentoring, ask questions. And of course, that's good. I'd rather have a CEO saying that than not saying it. But I said, how many people come? I said, here's my guess. There's 30 people, maybe 35, in the whole company that on any regular basis that aren't on your immediate team come to talk to you. For mentoring. He actually took a pause. He's like, yeah, that's about how many come. And there's hundreds and hundreds of people in this company, thousands now. This is the problem. So I think it comes back to this idea you mentioned earlier on, Kyung, of as somebody goes up in seniority, becomes the CEO, the amount of truth they're getting is so much lower than they think. Because they're just still being themselves. As one executive said to me, I noticed over time that the more senior I got, the funnier I became. That this had a lot more to do with my seniority than my sense of humor improving. So somehow we have to create this, dismantle all of these natural barriers to people being able to develop to actually be able to be as capable in their job as they were when we hired them. Thank you. Okay, a couple more questions, please, from the group. Yeah, so I'm gonna plus that to say, not just are you open to it, but if you are open to it, how do you really do that? Because I know a lot of people, especially in a fast-moving industry, they're on a track, they don't really want to be on that track, they're capable. They won't even get through the screening of their resume. For sure not. And yet they're perfectly capable to do the task, they won't even get through. So how do you address that? What are your thoughts?
Well, I firmly believe in transferable skills. I think it's really important to think about what skills have you developed doing whatever you're doing, and can those transfer to whatever we need. And I think you're talking about from the outside, I think, but we have the same issue internally, right? If somebody wants to make a change, they've only been doing sales for 3 years, now they want to move into some other area of the company, marketing, customer support, whatever. We can easily find somebody from the outside that fits the job description perfectly, right? It's an endless supply of talent in the outside world. So what's the balance, and how do we know whether we should take a chance with somebody inside? They've proven culturally and otherwise that they can be successful, but they have never done that job before. And our tendency is to take that chance on the individual internally and grow and develop them through mentorship and other things to give them that shot. We can always find somebody from the outside. Similarly, looking from the outside, I can find somebody who has 15 years in enterprise marketing experience versus the person who was an anchor at a local news station who developed some of the same skills and abilities perhaps, but doesn't have the proven experience. And then you're looking for, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to shore up the group you have with some expertise that you don't have in it? Or in fact, are you trying to diversify the stodgy state approach that everybody else in the world has by bringing in something new? And I think that the need, again, for the role and what are we really trying to do with it dictates whether you're open to somebody with a wildly different background or not.
Give us an example, Evan, of someone who internally wanted to be in a totally different industry, but different area within the company, and that was made possible. Tell us about.
Yeah, we have them all the time. So we just had somebody who, in our customer success organization, so they do what we used to call tech support, which we're now trying to modernize with a different term. But end users who have some question about our product, they were managing a team in there, and they'd been doing it for 4 years, which is pretty much the history of our company, and wanted to try something else. We took a chance on moving them into the sales engineering organization. These are the folks who work with customers to answer all the technical questions about our product. Didn't really have the background, but certainly had the interest, and so let him go through the interview process. He wowed the team with his knowledge of the product. They thought they could shore up his kind of technical skills, and we said, yeah, let's do it. Let's take that chance and see if it works.
Do you think in Vox today it is easier, if somebody wants to get on a slightly different or even very different career track, is it easier for them to leave and pursue that, or is it easier for them to do that within Vox?
Yeah, and that's the question that I challenge my team on every day, right? Because
Yeah.
if it's easier, the generalized version is, if it's easier to get a job outside the company than it is inside the company, you're in big trouble, right? So if you put more barriers in place inside, somebody will just go outside. It's a hot market, certainly here in the Valley and anywhere that we exist, and so you don't want to do that. At the same time, you don't want to necessarily just let people who, I was the receptionist and now I'm interested in sales. You want to make sure that there's some connection to skills, abilities, interests, career path, et cetera. So you have to have a robust enough process that you make sure you get the best person for the role, but you also have to make sure that it's not easier to go outside to develop what you want to do in your career. And that's a dynamic tension that keeps changing based on individual situations, needs, and interests.
Pushing you on it, which do you honestly think today is easier? Is it easier for people to leave and get their job, or easier for them to be able to find their sort of next dream job inside the company?
Currently, it's easier inside.
Inside.
I think the question is, are we going to be able to maintain
Continue that as
Since
you
we're
grow.
growing so fast, we're always going to need to hire new people. Do we always hire the senior people from the outside, and therefore the people inside don't feel like they have a chance to move up and have a career? Or can we take some chances to move in the senior roles? I think it's harder. In the more junior roles, it's easier.
I was talking to an executive at Salesforce recently who said that they had set this as a standard. We want it to be easier to get a job internally than externally. They thought that was an pretty easy standard. And they found it incredibly hard. They found it was, actually they admitted, I don't think we have achieved that. It's still easier to get to the next level.
I think it's easier, but you do it on metrics as well, right? So we have a metric that we want 50% of managerial positions filled from the inside. And we came just short, like 45 or something percent last time around, right? So you have to figure out what good would look like, and then you have to try to hit that, and you have to know that you might not always get it. But that means we have to train people, that means we have to select people. I mean, there's a lot of work behind that. It's not just, we could easily hit 50% just putting people in it, but the disaster it would be if they weren't any good would be a problem. So, pick the metrics that matter and then hold yourself accountable to reaching them.
That's great. Okay, a couple more questions. Okay, there's kind of I don't know if I can even sense one thread through that, but there is a very interesting question here about ageism. I mean, obviously today we talk a lot about diversity. But I remember, for example, even here at Stanford, which is a fairly, fair enough point to in the business school, we talked all the time about diversity, all the time. Massive, how many countries everybody comes from, background, industry, and yet, for obvious reasons, the age group was really similar for the group of people you brought in. And I thought often the biggest diversity gap isn't just country to country, it's age, it's generational. So I think your point is a very valid one. How do you deal with that? How do you think about that in your work first, Kyung, and then maybe here?
So if people want to become serious CEOs in their first CEO job, they have to hit it by the time, I mean, there's a window. You can't wait until you're 50 to get your first CEO job.
What do you think the window is?
So I think you have to be getting these responsibilities, P&L, bigger people, geography. You have to be kind of on that ladder, right?
Yep.
And so 40, I mean, 40 to 50 is that window, and it's actually on the lower end of that, right? So, and then for the startups, it's even lower. It's in their 30s. So. I think this ageism thing, especially in a place like Silicon Valley, is very real. And then in places like Korea, they retire you by the time you're 55. There are no more jobs, and you better not even be a sales guy because you have to do peer-to-peer kind of relationship thing. So it's very tough. But in terms of the mobility and all of that. There's a whole relationship between mobility, geographic mobility, industry mobility, and company-to-company mobility. And America is sort of extreme, or has been anyway, in terms of the opportunities for mobility. But in a place like Korea, or even a large country like China, this thing about mobility is not robust.
Do you mean mobility within the company, or do you mean mobility side companies? Yeah.
Outside, yeah. And in a place like Korea, if you're a Samsung executive, you're probably not going to go and become a high-level LG executive. And the families are kind of like, the Capulets and the Montagues, right? The families behind these jebos. So until that gets more transformed into more, like a less personal, less human, oriented kind of dynamics, that idea of true mobility and true opportunity I don't think it's really going to be there. But it's happening more now than in the past.
That's great. Here, Evan, a chance to comment here.
Yeah, I have
Henry.
a slightly different approach to yours. So I think we look for very specific things in the companies that I've been at. We look for people who are learning agile, who can pick up new things, who are interested in new things. We look for people who move fast. We look for a whole bunch of things that I know 21-year-olds who are terrible at, and I know 65-year-olds who are awesome at. I don't think it's age, technically age, but we do look for a certain type of people that people have, I think, mistakenly associated with it's only young people, and therefore we only hire young people. We have one of our software engineers who leads our mobile product is 65, and he is the most energetic, most open to learning guy in the whole company, right? It's not about kind of actual age. I think it's about how you show up, how you approach your work, how you approach learning, and that we're pretty clear on, and we're not going to budge on those things. I think that was the same view that we had at Google as well.
What's the average age of employee at Box?
32 and a half. But you would guess walking around it was 22. Right, because of the energy and the speed and that, I guess that's my answer, right? It's the feeling. You wouldn't know that if you walked through our office. You'd think it was 22.
You'd think it was even younger, which I think is true having been to Box. But still, the average age makes the point that you're I think trying to make here.
When you were HP, what was the average age?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I want the number as quickly as you had 32 and a half, because that was pretty impressive.
But I will say, 350,000 people across, so many countries, very different roles. I think it was probably a little bit older, but maybe not that much older.
When you walked into the office, you were based here, yes?
Yep.
You walked through, you see all the cubicles. Average age, you think, was?
You probably feel like it was older than that.
It might be the opposite effect.
But again, it might be the behavior versus the actual.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, a couple more questions here for the group. Evan came from HP.
This is. I don't. So let's see. What's the best way to answer that? I think we have views of companies that are great producers of talent and those that aren't. We're also our company's trying to do something different in the space. We're trying to have a consumer approach to enterprise software as a service. Right. So we actually have people, we want to mix those. We want people from consumer, fast, and we want people from the Oracles and HPs who have really figured out how to work with enterprises and sell things consistently over time. So we're actually looking for the double unicorn who worked at HP but could have also worked at Google. And that's the person we want, if that makes sense. I don't judge the talent necessarily from HP differently than from Google, but the people who have been successful in those systems, we need the ones who could have worked in both systems, and that's not always true. There are people at Google who could not possibly work in a HP or Oracle, and vice versa.
Who do you see as the place to look for talent?
So we like people from the enterprise companies. Salesforce is a good model for us because they're in our space and they've done what we're hoping to do, but they did it 10 years earlier than we did. So that's a good place for talent for us. And then we like diverse talent. So we look at lots of different companies, industries. One of my challenges now is we know the engineering space in the Valley extremely well. We're highly networked. We know who to look for. We know what companies. I feel like we need to jump networks and start to create new nodes in areas that we never would have thought of. So I'm constantly challenging my team. Like maybe there's somebody in aerospace who's just got the right skill set that would be interesting for us and diverse and create an attachment to a whole area that we don't currently pull talent from. Maybe that's geographic, maybe that's industry, but I think we get pretty insular in the Valley in a lot of ways, and we think only the people who are engineers here from any of those companies are the ones that we would want to work with, and I just inherently don't think that's true.
Yeah, I definitely feel that there is a barrier to entry based on where you are currently living, what company you were in immediately previously. It's, I think, a very different brand evaluation. Okay, a couple more questions. Wait, practices for literally hiring people
without considering certain positions.
yeah, exactly, without a specific thing. Kyung, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, when people come to you, boards come to you, they are saying, this is a position we need filled.
Yeah, well, it's hard for me because the only experience I've had is at the very top, at the board level and the C-suite. But there are companies that have ongoing talent management. There are some companies that really want to constantly have a radar out for talent, good talent, and they want to get to know them and have ways of evaluating and bringing them in. There used to be many programs like MBA programs. Like when I got out of MBA school, there were MBA executive roles that and they used to rotate you around and then give you very good exposure to a lot of things, and then you land somewhere by mutual agreement and opportunity. I think there are fewer of those things going on now, but it takes a longer term, more strategic approach to talent. So I think it's only people that have, that are not like just operating on thin margins and just putting out fires every day, they're going to have that. And, so, yeah.
I'll give you an example. We, in a 2-week period, we identified at Box, this was about 8 months ago, that we wanted to get the best possible MBA students to apply to Box. And no technology company at our size or scale has any kind of rotational program for real. Bigger companies sometimes do, but it's only in finance or sales. Right? So we spent 2 weeks and created an MBA rotational program, 3 9-month rotations across every part of the business, but we don't know which ones it's going to be yet. So I own the head count to smooth the path of, the engineering team doesn't need a head count to get one of these people. They just need to pitch for an awesome role for 9 months. And we got amazing people. One is a Stanford MBA. We just took 4, right? We're an 800-person company. We took 4 of these MBAs, and they're going to rotate around. And in the interview process, we were looking for the people who could do lots of different things. My goal was, sitting around the executive staff table 10, 15 years from now, I want people who have worked in lots of parts of the business, because the job there is to lead the company, not to lead your own function. And sometimes that's hard for people to get their head around. So I want people at that table in 10 years, 15 years who have been all over the company and understand and have the relationships and don't have the in-group, out-group, like, oh, those guys over there suck and we're good. And so we got it, and we're thrilled about it. We launched it in August in terms of the people actually showing up and doing it, so we'll see. But we identified people in that process who would be great in a finance role, but they didn't make it into a rotational role. It's a different set of skills, capabilities, mindset, diversity, ability to work across ambiguous boundaries, things like that. So, and now we're creating one for undergrads because we had a great experience and we want to do the same thing at a earlier career level. So
That's great.
it's possible. It takes a lot of time and energy, especially at a small scale, and so it doesn't happen that much, but I think it's really important.
That's great.
Then I will caution, you have the problem of you don't want those folks to be seen as more special necessarily than any other MBA you just hired to do a job, or anybody who's already within the company who may not be having those opportunities. So you have to kind of parallel create that opportunity for people who are already in the company, as well as the special new ones you're going to bring in. And that's tricky culturally.
Okay, this is great. We have about 10 minutes left of this panel, so what I want to do is move to like a rapid phase. So you're going to ask your question, you're going to have about 30 seconds. I think I'll have just one of each of you answer. Okay, Evan, go. 30 seconds.
It is. Often they don't hear the feedback and they don't understand. So it's worth it to try to mentor. We give people chances to improve with good feedback, but sometimes it's just not going to be a fit. We think everybody who leaves our company is an alum of our company. They're our brand walking around on the street. So we maintain great relationships. About half of the people that I've had to manage out refer people to us to work at Box. So they've had a good experience, even though we help them see they could be more successful somewhere else.
Yeah, you can get rid of someone without being inhumane about it.
You have to be respectful and value them when you get rid
And
of
yet so often it isn't done respectfully. So somebody's been in a company, they may have given sort of the blood, their life for 35 years to a company, and then they are literally walked out the door. Get your boxes, you are leaving. As if somehow now you're distrusted, it's almost a criminal. I absolutely seen this. I think it's inexcusable, and I don't even know quite what the logic is that fits it, but thank you for that question. Next. Oh, that's interesting. A company that is exporting startup talent. Kyung, what do you think about this?
For management.
For management, yeah.
So for startups, I don't think the CEOs in that, the CEOs who are being groomed to take over GE CEO positions wouldn't necessarily be right for the startup CEO. Just because they didn't make it as a CEO, they're not going to go to a startup and be a startup CEO. Probably not. They're probably going to go to IBM or some other big company like that. But I think the general P&L executives that have really great P&L and geographic responsibility and have demonstrated hands-on capability and much more entrepreneurial and kind of, that kind of risk-taking behavior are good candidates for. So you find those people in companies like Google. I mean, for example, Marissa Mayer came from Google. So there was a cultural fit between Yahoo and Google and the kind of risk-taking behavior, and she was a moderate level. She wasn't groomed for the top, and she would never be the top of Google, but she was able to go over to Yahoo because they needed that skill set. So
is Google the new GE of management, sending people out into startups? Is Google to startups what GE was to general management?
Yeah, well, in the Pacific Northwest, Microsoft is a great place for many Microsoft executives go on to become CEOs of startups there in that ecosystem. If you're doing consumer, then maybe it's like Starbucks. Here, if you're in the software industry, you're going to get software, Salesforce people or Autodesk people or Adobe people going into software startups. So I think it's relevant to the industry. It's not like general. You're not going to pull general talent over. But if you, have digital, internet, e-commerce, location-based systems, you're trying to create smart cars, then yeah, Google would be a great place to get kind of senior level executives who can then go on to become CEOs. Samsung has been a very good trainer of technology talent. They've been very innovative. They've been working on globalizing their talent for many years, almost 20 years now. Oh yeah, well, exporting, they have people all over the world. Not really. Well, like Eric Kim was the top marketing guy at Samsung. He became one of the business units for consumer homes at Intel. And then he went and became a CEO of a company called Sora, which is a luminescent light bulb company. Now he's sitting on boards. So I think you see some progression like that. But you don't see mass exodus out of places like Samsung because it's, people don't, it's hard to replicate those jobs. And as we said before, it's not like there's so much ease of movement among those kind of industries.
That's great. Okay, more questions.
So, well, look at what happened to HP. With each successive CEO, you had massive exodus, right? And massive incoming. So that's a board question. What kind of CEO are you going to put in there? And what kind? But the thing is that it is possible to define a culture that is not necessarily just a total reflection of the new leader coming in. I mean, Google already has a culture, and HP has its own culture, and Intel has its culture, and Salesforce has its, and Oracle has its culture. And I think even if you recruited a new CEO, it would take a while for those cultures to transform.
What's interesting is all of those companies you mentioned are founder-led except HP.
Yeah.
And you could argue that HP
Has lost its way. Sorry, I wasn't
lost
exactly supposed to put
intentionally
those
or
words in
unintentionally
your-
its culture when
Yeah.
it brought in its first external
Yeah.
CEO, Carly,
Yeah.
in 2002 or
Yeah.
whatever it was, right? That was the first time a non-HP CEO was
Yeah.
put in place, and it changed. Now,
Yeah.
then my understanding was it was intentional. They wanted to shake it up. But
Yeah.
all the other ones are actually founder-led companies, and that's a whole different situation,
It's
I think.
very interesting. The Apple situation is interesting because now there's a different kind of leader, very different kind of leader inside Apple. And I know many people that went to they stayed there, very senior people, because they said, this is no fun here. Steve makes all the decisions. I don't get to, but I'm here because I want to be next to Steve Jobs. I'm learning a lot. We're moving the needle. And without that kind of inspirational leader, I don't know, the culture of that, the cultural definition of Apple would have to be much stronger to have it pervade and keep all these people that stayed there because of the Steve Jobs culture. Because now you don't have Steve Jobs. So I don't know what kind of culture that Apple's going to have either.
Well, and so 30 seconds on culture. My view is culture at the end of the day is really only the behaviors that are regularly performed and repeated by people in the company and rewarded, and those that don't happen and or punished, right? So the culture is made up of what everybody does on a daily basis and what's rewarded and what's shunned.
Yeah, it's not mystical.
I don't think it's ethereal, but where you see it is in the behavior. And so the role of a senior leader to influence that culture is what behaviors do they tolerate, what behaviors do they reward, what behaviors do they model themselves. So the person who walks down the hall and sees garbage on the floor and says, gee, I wonder why our janitor staff is so bad, versus the one who sees garbage on the floor and picks it up and throws it away because they feel like they're an owner in the company. That's a very different culture that forms from that one simple behavior and how it's expected and how it's seen. So I think the leaders can certainly influence the culture, but they do it through how they think about the behaviors of others. Do you keep the person who's killing their sales numbers, who's a total ass, who everybody hates, or not? That's a very important cultural decision. Because are you willing to give up on the collaborative, fun, whatever the values are, to get results or not? And if you are, then the culture slips a little to something different than maybe what it was.
I want this thought here. Let's just divide it for a second. So there are two different choices. There is the choice of somebody is not a fit. There's a right choice. And then there's how you do it. Can you do it in a humane way? Yeah. Tell us about a scenario where obviously no details that we couldn't share, but a scenario that it was done wrong.
It was done wrong. I've seen it done wrong a lot. Luckily, not in my current venue, but
tell us where you've seen it done wrong.
There's flips switched in people's heads all the time. The person who was on the top talent list for 10 years and suddenly you're managing them out and you're like, what just happened, right? That happens all the time in companies, unfortunately. And you have to say, what? We were giving mixed signals along the way, or are we changing what we're doing as a company and this person really isn't a fit now? But there's a lot of kind of flavor of the month when people talk about talent. I hate that. I think there's good and bad about everybody. You have those conversations along the way, and it shouldn't be, I tell my managers, a performance review should never be a surprise. And I tell our employees, if you hear something surprising in your performance review, then your manager has failed because they haven't been giving you regular, consistent, actionable, timely feedback. So you shouldn't get to a situation where suddenly somebody's not a fit. you get to situations where somebody's not working out. We put people on performance improvement plans, not because legally it's easier or safer. I don't care about that, frankly. I'm willing to take the hit if it's the right thing for the company to get rid of somebody. We only put them on plans if we think they can succeed. And part of what always happens, we have more than 50% of people succeed out of performance improvement plans because there was just misaligned expectations between the manager and the boxer, is what we call ourselves, about what their job was. So when you put a plan together, you have to get really specific about that. And we force the manager to get specific and the employee. So we actually have a lot of saves, which is why it's worth spending the time. You spend so much time attracting the right people and vetting them, and don't give up on them just because of one bad interaction. At the same time, there are people who don't fit despite our best vetting. And then why be inhumane about it? It's a small valley. It's, according to Thomas Friedman, a small world now. We think our brand is walking around, as I said before. And the conversations I have are typically, look, you're not succeeding here. You probably sense it. We sense it. Why wouldn't we want you to, we think you're great or we wouldn't have hired you, so why wouldn't you want to go somewhere where you can be more successful? It's better for us, it's better for you, and then we do the right thing in making sure that they can do that in a timely fashion, in a way that makes sense. We help them save their sense of worth and their virtue throughout the process. There's no reason to walk somebody.
How do you do it?
You don't walk somebody out under security, for example. Why would you do that? There have been times for security reasons we turn off people's access after we have that conversation, and we tell them we're going to do that. It's not a surprise, right? You have access to sensitive stuff. We don't. But and then we maintain that kind of their humanity and their sense of worth through the process. And as I said, about 50% of them say it was a great experience and send us referrals. So we think that's a good sign. We've never had somebody not sign our mutual separation agreement either. So that's a technical version of that.
Yes. Okay, so let me just follow up finally on this then. So give me an actual person that is now still kind of friends, alumni of Box, and why they were let go, and what you actually did to make sure that relationship was friendly, other than just not doing anything, awful like walking them out the door.
Yeah. So somebody on one of my teams. They just weren't performing at the same level as they used to be. We had some good conversations about what do you want to do with your
direct
life.
Report to you?
Not a direct report, but in my organization.
Okay, got it.
Had some good conversations about what do you want to do with your life, that person saw that they weren't performing at the same level they used to be. They had some other interests. We kind of said, hey, this isn't really good for you. We're holding you back from doing the stuff you want to do. You're not performing at the level you're capable of and we need. And just saw him at one of my team members' weddings the other weekend, and he started his own company. He's doing great things. He's loving life. And he came to the wedding of his manager, right? So it's clearly the relationships are all still intact. That's a great story, right? And we could have more of those stories if we spent the time to do it. But often we just say, oh, they're no good. Let's cut them and move on to. And there is a time sink, clearly. So you have to believe in the virtue of the outcome that holds people as valuable. And you have to believe that matters, or else you wouldn't spend the time that way.
Yeah, that's great. Listen, thank you ever so much for the questions that we've had. I think that the panel has been, as I said before, very particularly useful for this conversation about being so selective in the bringing the talent in, making sure that the talent is actually utilized well, and also pruning in a way that is as humane as possible. Please, round of applause for both Evan and Kyung.
Thank you.